Now, in addition to information asymmetry, like who's got the actual raw data, there's perception. Perception is key in trial. Well, it's key in the OODA loop because it's the whole, as far as orientation in the OODA loop, the first question of orientation is, what does this mean to me? And that is entirely perception. In trial practice, trials do not turn on the facts. Trials do not turn on the evidence. They turn on the jury's perception of the evidence. They're getting all kinds of information from all different people, could mean all kinds of different things. The verdict is, what does that mean to the jurors? In rule of law is about perception. Do the people perceive the government as legitimate? Do they perceive themselves as beholden to the law? Do the people holding power perceive themselves as above the law, and therefore they disregard it, creating rule of might, vice rule of law? So perception's key in pretty much everything we do as judge advocates. Where does perception come from? Well, first, you've got a person. Everyone goes through life with a certain amount of baggage. You've lived your life, you have all kinds of experiences, you have your culture, your values that tell you the way things should be. These cause you to form what are called schema. Mental models, they basically boil down to stereotypes, all right? Little girls like pink fluffy stuff, little boys like dirt and dump trucks. Those are your expectations. If you hear, Lacey the cheerleader's car broke down, but she took care of it, you assume that, without messing up her nail polish, she, dialed for roadside assistance, and they came. You do not assume that Lacey the cheerleader grabbed the big toolbox out of her trunk, adjusted the fuel flow into her carburetor, scraped a little carbon off the spark plugs, put everything back together, and off she went. That falls outside your expectation. And it's all about expectations because you get new information coming in. When new information comes in, you have to decide, which schema am I going to apply? Is this Lacey the tomboy with the gearhead brothers who can fix a car? Or is this Lacey the cheerleader who's not going to touch something dirty? In a trial, you give people the stereotype you want. You give them the schema you want them to apply. If you don't give them a schema, then they're just going haphazard and they're going to pull it together for themselves. The whole concept of theme and theory is you're giving them a schema. In the case study, the trial counsel went in there and said, philandering husband. People can understand the concept of philandering husband. They understand, misogynistic behavior, and when they apply those stereotypes, they say, yeah, someone who fits in that category would try and grope his neighbor and maybe, make a move on her, and everything kind of plays into that. So you give them the mental model, and then you feed the facts into that mental model. The defense went in there with a schema too. Confused woman. She was confused before she went to bed, so she was probably super tired. She was obviously confused when she woke up because she imagined this whole thing. And at the end, the jury just decides whose mental model works better, or if the both of you are way off track, they will just pull up one of their own schema and say, I think this is what really happened because both these guys are kind of out to lunch. But what that boils down to is people make predictions, all right? I've got my understanding of the world, I'm receiving this information, I'm making a prediction. If you think that that guy you work with is just a social climbing, no good backstabber, when he brings in a Christmas gift for everyone and starts handing out gift cards, you do not think this is a benevolent gesture. You think that this is part of his grand scheme to take advantage of everyone. It's all about, once you apply that schema, it becomes an anchor. Once people drop the anchor, once the jury says, yeah, I think that schema is the right one, getting them to pull up that anchor and put it somewhere else is a big trick, which is why you need to go in there with the right schema right up front and get them on track. All right, now just to close this out, after people make these predictions, they then observe, was I actually right? And again, they're observing, was I actually right through the lens of, this is the way I interpret things. And that goes and feeds into their reinforcing their worldview. So that's perception. All right, so we've talked about information issues. We've talked about issues with people. Let's talk a little bit about systems. Wicked problems is, well, first off, obviously it's from Boston because the problems are wicked. But what it is a category from public policy planning where they said there's these certain kinds of public policy issues that are just so thorny they're almost impossible to solve. And there's a whole laundry list of criteria. I just pulled out 4. Number 1, we saw before in the definition of friction, conflicting or undefined goals. So again, while I can't tell you how to define goals, don't have the time, I will point out doing that is very important. It's worth your while to figure out how to define your goals properly. Different interpretations of the issue suggest different resolution. If you look at security in Iraq is a product of how many troops we have on the ground, the solution for security is obvious. Somebody, tell me. Captain Sander.
Sir?
Troops on the ground. You need more security. Troops on the ground equals security. What do you do?
Increase the troops if you need more security.
Good call. All right. Next issue. You've got the same problem. We want security in Iraq. We look at this situation and we see the whole reason that foreign fighters are coming into Iraq is because the United States is there. The U.S. has entered the House of Islam. This is an offense to radical Muslims. If by having troops on the ground, we are causing more and more people to come in. There's a positive feedback ratio. More troops equals more foreign fighters. Captain Olson, how do you increase security if the problem is American troops on the ground?
Pull out the American troops.
Exactly. So you've got the same problem, and the solution depends exactly on how you identify the problem. What you need to do is understand there's two different interpretations, and then you'd have to do a little bit of math and understand, all right, what's the feedback correlation? Because if 100 troops is only a slight increase in security, then you bring in the extra 100 guys. On the other hand, if 100 guys equals 200 foreign fighters, maybe you want to start pulling people out. But it's all about understanding there's multiple interpretations to these problems. That also showed how issues are intertwined, all right? The level of security is not going to just immediately start dropping when you start bringing in more troops. Solutions may not actually resolve the issue. You bring in more troops, turns out there's more violence. You've actually got this sliding scale. The solution you propose may turn out to fall anywhere along the scale of, hey, we actually solved the problem, to, wow, we really made things worse. Oops. Why does this happen? It's because everything is interconnected. When you put a witness on the stand, as a for instance, he is not a self-contained unit. He's going to sit down, everyone's going to immediately judge him, and that's the end of it. No. It's going to be affected first by a bunch of small things immediately relevant to him. Did he have his coffee that morning? Because if not, maybe he sounds very boring, very detached, and disengaged. Do we have him testify on this side issue? Because on that side issue, he sounds very credible, and there's a spillover effect, and that makes him sound even more intelligent when he's talking about the central issue. Or maybe he sounds very not credible, and that reduces his credibility. And bias. How good is opposing counsel at pulling out his bias? So you got a bunch of immediately impacting variables. Then you've got completely, they're removed, and there are other significant variables that are, well, they're going to tie into a lot more things. If witness B comes in and contradicts witness A, who's more believable? What's the outcome? Who's bolstered? How does that play out? Then you've got your second and third order type effects. Document 1 comes in. That bolsters B's testimony. B now seems more effective. He's contradicting A. So as these things play out, you've got all these separate variables that are changing the situation that you need to shape in order to achieve your desired end state. So dancing landscapes is an actual term. What you have is, this is your landscape. You've got a bunch of variables. As this variable goes up, maybe this one goes down. Maybe it goes down exponentially, or maybe it rises exponentially. Maybe it just goes up a little bit. But you've got this whole landscape of variables, and they're all shifting. As one thing shifts, something else shifts. So your landscape dances. So you got to understand there's all these interconnected issues, and you got to understand your situation so you know how to affect the outcome. All right. I am not going to read all of these for time considerations. But basically we learned you got problems with people, including yourselves and your friends. You got problems with information, having it, interpreting it, perceiving it the right way. And we heard a couple times, ill-defined problem statements cause problems, unclear criteria of success create problems. You really want to start with criteria of success. When I talk about purpose, I mean, what are your criteria of success? How do you define, I'm done? This means we're good, we can go home, we win. And the follow-on to all of that is, solutions may need to be abandoned along the way. As the situation evolves, as other variables shift, you need to be flexible. So you need a dynamic plan. Your plan cannot be, we're going to go in, we're going to do this, and everything's going to work. You got to expect things aren't going to work. We're going to need to adapt. Whatever we think is going to work at the beginning is probably not going to be what we finish with. And let's tie this back together. All of this interferes with us getting to action. This all interferes with our OODA loop. How does it interfere? Well, friction can be used to shape outcomes, expand the OODA loop, expand meaning it just takes them longer to get through it, or disrupt and overload. Let's talk about each of these individually. Shaping. I gave you an example of that. The defendant's wife's conduct was shaped by the way the issue was presented to her. It was presented to her as, your husband didn't need to go inside the house. So naturally said, yeah, he did. He couldn't leave the stuff outside. Whereas defendant had on his own said, well, I was justified in going to the house because I thought I could leave the stuff outside. So her conduct was shaped by getting her to apply the wrong schema. She had the wrong interpretation. She lost. If you saw the movie A Few Good Men, you saw altering priorities. All right, there's, Jack Nicholson is Colonel Jessup. He has this cognitive dissonance, these two conflicting goals. On the one hand, he wants to say, look, don't question me. I'm here to provide security. I'm here to protect the best interests of the United States. Just back off. On the other hand, he's thinking, I don't really want to get in trouble at this court-martial. And that's his immediate goal. So he's pursuing his immediate goal of, I don't want to really get in trouble. I don't want the guys who are following my command to get in trouble. And the whole Lieutenant Caffey thing with the, when he's imitating Jack Nicholson, they want me on that wall. They need me on that wall. What he's doing is he's saying, I'm going to get him to shift so that he places higher priority on stating his position that he's protecting the national interest. And for those of you who don't actually understand the movie, it's not that Jack Nicholson was right in protecting the national interest, it's that he did not take responsibility for his actions. But that's a tangent.